They say truth sleeps beneath the surface of every illusion, quiet, patient, waiting for the moment when the mask finally cracks. On that sweltering afternoon, when the wife threw open the doors and summoned the town to witness her husband's shame, it wasn't merely a scandal that erupted, it was truth itself breaking free, raw and unforgiving, forcing everyone to confront the darkness they had long refused to see. The discovery of the plantation owner in bed with 3 male slaves is not merely a shocking act of betrayal or scandal. It is a symbolic moment where the hidden contents of the unconscious are violently brought into the light. Beneath the surface of moral order and authority, there exists a shadow realm where the repressed desires, fears, and impulses of the human psyche reside. The plantation owner, once a figure of dominance and power, becomes the embodiment of this repressed energy breaking free. His hidden indulgence with those he enslaves represents the eruption of that shadow, the dark side of the self that society and the individual both try desperately to conceal. This event, though scandalous on the surface, holds profound psychological significance. It demonstrates how every act of suppression eventually seeks expression, and how the self, when divided against its own nature, becomes the stage for destruction. The world of the plantation, built on control, hierarchy, and exploitation, mirrors the inner psyche of the man who rules it. His entire existence is organized around dominance, over land, over people, over appearances. Yet power without reflection breeds an inner hollowness, and that emptiness must eventually find form. His act with the slaves is not just a moral corruption. It is an unconscious attempt to reconcile his fragmented self. The slaves, in this sense, symbolize the repressed elements of his mind, the parts of his being he deems inferior, forbidden, or unworthy of acknowledgement. In his physical submission to what he outwardly controls, he is unconsciously drawn toward the very forces he has denied. This act of forbidden intimacy, therefore, becomes a dark ritual of integration, though carried out unconsciously and destructively. It is not love or lust alone that drives him, but an unacknowledged compulsion toward the shadow, an instinctive return to what his conscious identity has tried to destroy. When his wife discovers him, the private act becomes a public revelation of the hidden psyche. The wife, representing the light of awareness, tears open the veil of illusion that concealed his inner world. Her shock is not just emotional, it is existential. What she uncovers is not simply infidelity, but the collapse of meaning, the disintegration of the persona that upheld her world. The man she thought she knew, the respected figure of order and masculinity, stands revealed as something else entirely, a man enslaved by his own contradictions. The exposure of the act, therefore, becomes a symbolic confrontation between consciousness and the unconscious, between the civilized mask and the primitive forces beneath it. In the moral structure of the town, the plantation owner embodies authority, virtue, and control, values that define not just him, but the social order itself. When his secret life is exposed, it does not only destroy his image, but shakes the collective illusion of purity that the town depends on. His fall becomes a mirror through which everyone glimpses their own denied desires. The community's outrage, though loud, is tinged with fascination, because the shadow he has revealed belongs to them as well. Every onlooker watching his punishment projects their own forbidden thoughts onto him, cleansing themselves through judgment while secretly recognizing the truth of their own nature. The spectacle of exposure becomes a ritual of purification for the entire collective psyche. His humiliation becomes the symbolic sacrifice demanded by a society desperate to maintain its illusion of moral superiority. From a psychological standpoint, the plantation owner's downfall illustrates the inevitable consequence of repression. When an individual builds identity upon denial, denying weakness, desire, vulnerability, or contradiction, the psyche seeks equilibrium by forcing the hidden content outward. The more tightly the shadow is suppressed, the more violently it demands release. His secret relations with the slaves are the expression of this law of psychic balance. They reveal how the human soul cannot be permanently divided between what is shown and what is hidden. The shadow, if ignored, finds its way to the surface through acts of compulsion, self-destruction, or scandal. What happens in the hidden room is a symbolic enactment of his own divided self imploding. The authority that governed others has collapsed inward, exposing the chaos beneath control. The presence of the slaves in this symbolic scene deepens the psychological truth. They are not simply victims or participants, but living reflections of the aspects of himself he has externalized: his instincts, his vulnerability, his capacity for submission and desire. In dominating them, he externalized his inner shadow. In being with them, he attempts to reabsorb what he has cast out. Yet because this act takes place without consciousness, it manifests as degradation rather than redemption. The unconscious seeks unity, but when that unity is achieved without awareness, it comes through destruction. Thus, what could have been a process of inner reconciliation becomes instead a catastrophic exposure of hypocrisy. The wife's discovery transforms this personal tragedy into an archetypal drama. In forcing his hidden truth into the light, she performs the role of consciousness confronting the unconscious. Her reaction, however painful, becomes the act of revelation that the psyche needs to restore balance. The plantation owner's downfall is therefore not just a punishment, but a revelation, a necessary disintegration of false identity. The act of being caught, of being seen, is his initiation into awareness, even if it comes through shame. The shadow, once exposed, loses its power to rule from darkness. What destroys him also frees him, though neither he nor those around him can yet understand it. This single moment, one night of exposure, encapsulates the eternal truth that no man can rule over others without first mastering himself, and no soul can remain divided without consequence. The plantation, the town, and the man himself all become symbols of the same human condition, the endless tension between the light we show and the darkness we hide. When the shadow is denied, it seeks its own justice, and that justice arrives not through reason, but through revelation. The wife's discovery is the turning point in which illusion gives way to truth. Power dissolves into vulnerability, and the hidden world beneath the surface demands to be seen. The wife's reaction in this story stands as an embodiment of the deeper, transformative force of the feminine principle, the one that does not merely punish but restores balance to a fractured world. Her discovery of the plantation owner's transgression awakens within her not only rage or humiliation, but an elemental awareness, a call to act as the vessel of truth in a world ruled by hypocrisy. Her decision to make the entire town witness his punishment transcends the boundaries of personal vengeance and enters the realm of moral revelation. The feminine force in this moment does not cry for private revenge. It demands that illusion be stripped away and the truth, no matter how painful, be seen by all. The wife becomes the unseen justice of the psyche, not the soft and submissive archetype society projects upon her, but the fierce counterpart to false authority. Her act is an eruption of what has long been denied, the power of the feminine to name, expose, and heal the sickness of the world. The plantation itself is not merely a home, but a symbol of order, dominance, and suppression. Within its whitewashed walls lies the illusion of virtue, hierarchy, and civility. But beneath this illusion, cruelty thrives. The master's betrayal is not only of his wife, but of the moral structure he helped enforce. For too long, she has been a silent observer of a system that demands her obedience and his supremacy. The discovery of his forbidden act tears open the veil that has long concealed the corruption at the heart of their world. In the very bed where power was asserted, she finds degradation. In the very heart of her home, she discovers chaos. This revelation transforms her from passive participant to active agent of truth. The pain that once would have broken her now fuels a new sense of moral clarity, the understanding that what has been hidden must be revealed for balance to return. Her decision to make the punishment public reflects an instinct far deeper than revenge. She understands, perhaps unconsciously, that private sin cannot be healed in private. The corruption of her husband is not his alone. It mirrors the sickness of the entire community that has allowed such cruelty, hierarchy, and pretense to fester. When she brings the town to witness, she transforms her pain into ritual. The act becomes a public exorcism, the exposure of darkness so that light might enter. Her husband's humiliation is not meant merely to destroy him, but to purge the collective moral rot. She knows that silence is complicity, and by forcing the town to see, she forces it to awaken. In her act, we witness the deeper wisdom of the feminine, not soft forgiveness, but sacred justice. She reclaims the authority that has been denied her by the patriarchal order. In a world where men like her husband wield power without conscience, she wields conscience without restraint. The very society that demanded her silence is made to confront its own reflection through her voice. Her authority does not come from law or position, but from moral truth, a truth born of suffering, clarity, and courage. By turning the scandal into a spectacle, she transforms shame into instruction. Every eye that watches the punishment becomes a participant in the ritual of recognition. The town cannot look away, for to do so would be to deny their own guilt. What makes her act extraordinary is that it moves beyond personal emotion into the domain of the archetypal. Her vengeance becomes mythic, the embodiment of divine retribution that restores the moral order of the cosmos. The feminine in her ceases to be merely the wife. She becomes the moral force that demands balance between what has been exalted and what has been degraded. The exposure of her husband is therefore symbolic of a greater revelation, the exposure of the false gods of power and pride. In her, the repressed conscience of the entire community finds voice. The woman who once stood in the shadow of her husband's authority now stands as the light that burns away deception. The punishment she enforces is also the moment of transformation for herself. Through this act, she moves from wounded wife to moral guardian. Her grief becomes sacred fire, purifying, consuming, and renewing. The pain of betrayal becomes the seed of vision. Where once she might have been complicit in silence, she now reclaims the authority to define right and wrong. The spectacle she creates becomes a moral mirror for the town, forcing each person to see that beneath their polished respectability lies the same corruption that consumed the man they now condemn. Her act is both a revelation and a warning that what is denied in the dark will eventually demand its place in the light. The reaction of the crowd deepens the significance of her act. They come expecting scandal but find judgment. They watch his punishment not as detached observers but as witnesses to their own suppressed truth. The wife, in commanding them to attend, turns them from voyeurs into confessors. Their gaze, meant to condemn the guilty man, turns inward as the truth unfolds before them. They begin to sense that what they are witnessing is not just one man's fall, but the collapse of the illusions that have sustained them all. Her act thus becomes a collective initiation, the breaking of denial that paves the way for collective awareness. The power she wields in this moment is not born of cruelty, but of necessity. The act of exposure, painful as it is, becomes the only way to restore moral order. Her husband's authority was false, built on deception and dominance. Her authority, though born from pain, is true because it reveals. The divine feminine is not afraid of darkness. It looks directly into it and compels others to do the same. Her command that the entire town witness his fall is therefore not vengeance. It is revelation. In her fury, she does what conscience must always do: bring the hidden into sight, shatter illusion, and restore balance through truth. Her act stands as a timeless symbol of what happens when the repressed feminine finally rises, when compassion transforms into justice, when silence becomes speech, and when pain becomes the voice of truth that can no longer be ignored. When the wife forced the entire town to witness the punishment of the plantation owner, the act transcended the boundaries of personal revenge and entered the realm of the collective psyche. The crowd that gathered was not simply there to see one man's humiliation, but to unconsciously confront its own darkness reflected in him. Every townsperson, whether they admitted it or not, carried within them a fragment of the same hidden corruption that the plantation owner embodied. His act, shocking, scandalous, and forbidden, became a mirror for all those who had ever harbored unspoken desires, unacknowledged hypocrisies, or silent complicity in the injustice around them. The wife's decision to turn private shame into a public ritual transformed the scene into something much larger. It became a symbolic exorcism of collective denial. The punishment of one man became the reckoning of an entire community that had built its comfort and civility upon lies and repression. As the townspeople gathered, they were confronted not only by the grotesque image of a fallen master, but by their own fascination with his fall. The air was thick with moral outrage, but beneath that outrage simmered curiosity, even hunger. They wanted to see him punished not only to uphold justice, but to experience the thrill of seeing their secret shadows projected onto someone else. This is the mechanism of projection at its purest. The process through which people cast their own unwanted desires and weaknesses onto others, so they may condemn them without recognizing themselves in the act. The town's condemnation of the plantation owner was therefore not an act of moral superiority, but one of self-deception. They despised in him what they feared in themselves. His exposure allowed them, for a brief moment, to feel cleansed of their own hidden sins. His humiliation became their catharsis. The wife, perhaps unknowingly, created a scene that revealed the collective unconscious of her society. The town's moral identity was constructed upon a false sense of purity, an illusion sustained by silence and denial. Everyone knew, in some corner of their minds, that the plantation system thrived on violence and hypocrisy, that the power they revered was built on cruelty, the faith they professed was hollow, and the order they defended was corrupted. Yet it was easier to pretend otherwise, to live within the safety of appearances. When the plantation owner's secret was revealed, it tore through the veil that held that illusion together. His scandal became the metaphorical breaking of the collective mask. The people's shock and disgust were not responses to something alien, but to something deeply familiar, the exposure of their own nature. As they watched the punishment unfold, something primal stirred within the crowd. The line between condemnation and complicity began to blur. In their shouts and whispers, in their gazes fixed upon his shame, there was a strange unity, a merging of judgment and desire, disgust and fascination. The spectacle became a ritual, a kind of dark communion through which the entire town participated in the revelation of the shadow. Each spectator became a confessor without words, silently offering their guilt to the scene before them. The wife's command for the town to watch transformed the punishment into a collective ceremony where truth replaced silence and exposure replaced denial. It was as though she had summoned the town's hidden soul and forced it to look at itself in a mirror it had long avoided. The crowd's reaction also revealed the instability of moral order. In witnessing his fall, they felt both terror and relief. They saw how fragile power truly was, how easily the structures they depended on could collapse when truth entered the light. The plantation owner, once a symbol of authority and virtue, now lay stripped of all illusion. His degradation revealed the falsity of the hierarchy they all upheld. For years, they had believed that wealth and control signified righteousness, that social rank reflected moral worth. But his exposure shattered that belief. They could no longer separate sin from power, corruption from respectability. What they witnessed was not only the fall of one man, but the unmasking of their entire social order. The moral foundations of the town trembled as they realized that the difference between master and servant, ruler and ruled, was thinner than they had ever imagined. Within the crowd, reactions varied. Some wept, some sneered, some turned away, yet all were transformed. The spectacle of punishment had forced them into self-awareness. Even those who clung to denial could no longer escape the faint recognition that what had been revealed in the master's sin lived also within them. The man's degradation had become a kind of mirror through which the town saw its own decay. It was not only sexual transgression that was on display, but the moral disease of a society built on oppression and hypocrisy. The wife, in her fury, had done more than punish her husband. She had torn open the collective wound of the town and made it bleed in public view. For the slaves who were involved, the spectacle carried another meaning. They had long been the silent bearers of the community's sin, its pain, and its violence. Now, for the first time, they witnessed the master brought low, his body exposed, his authority destroyed. In that moment, power was reversed. The ones who had been invisible became witnesses, and the one who had been untouchable became an object of judgment. The scene carried within it the potential for liberation, not merely political, but psychological. The inversion of power created a fracture in the collective illusion that had justified their subjugation. The slaves' quiet, knowing presence during the punishment reminded the crowd of what they had denied, that the human spirit, no matter how oppressed, remains a witness to truth. By compelling the entire community to face this act, the wife awakened something dangerous but necessary: awareness. Awareness of the darkness that lives beneath civility, of the deceit that sustains social order, and of the fragile balance between power and morality. The town could no longer pretend that corruption was an isolated flaw in one man. They had seen too much. The punishment, though cruel, became a form of revelation. Through one man's disgrace, an entire society glimpsed its true reflection. The crowd left not with satisfaction but with unease, haunted by what they had witnessed. The wife's command had turned a scandal into a mirror in which every soul, no matter how righteous it seemed, was forced to see the shadow of its own making. The scene of the plantation owner in bed with 3 male slaves holds within it a profound inversion of the power structures that defined his world. It is not simply a scandal or moral collapse, but an archetypal reversal, a turning of the wheel of dominance that reveals the fragility of authority itself. For years, the master's identity has been built upon control over his land, his laborers, his image, and even his wife. He has lived within a carefully constructed illusion that he is the center of order, that his superiority is natural, and that his desires, actions, and decrees define truth. Yet in this single act, that illusion shatters. What he had enslaved now becomes the mirror of his enslavement. The slaves, whom he considered mere extensions of his will, become the silent witnesses of his vulnerability and his hidden truth. In his submission to what he outwardly rules, the hierarchy collapses. The boundaries between master and servant dissolve, and the secret world of desire exposes the falseness of social order. What emerges is the revelation that power is never absolute. It exists only as long as illusion sustains it. In the rigid social framework of the plantation, the master's word was law. His dominance was not only physical, but moral, sustained by the belief that he embodied strength, virtue, and command. Yet his secret desire destroys this mask. The act of lying with those he enslaved undermines the very logic of his authority. It reveals that the master's control was not purity, but repression, that beneath the performance of power lay an unacknowledged dependency. In a moment that should have reaffirmed his dominance, he is instead stripped bare by his own contradictions. He becomes not the ruler, but the ruled, not the possessor, but the possessed. The same hands that once obeyed him become the witnesses to his undoing. This reversal of power exposes the deeper psychological truth that the oppressor and the oppressed are bound together in a single cycle of projection and denial. The master's domination over others was, in fact, a way to avoid confronting the chaos within himself. His entire identity as a master was a defense against the recognition of his own inner servitude to desire, fear, and guilt. When the wife discovers him, she finds not only betrayal, but a revelation of weakness that tears apart the illusion of masculinity upon which her life and society were built. The figure who once represented order and control now lies in a position of submission, stripped of the myth that made him powerful. In this moment, the traditional gender and social hierarchies collapse together. The masculine principle of control is revealed as a fragile facade, and the feminine principle of perception and judgment rises to confront it. The act, though private, becomes a metaphor for the reversal of cosmic order, the inevitable fall that follows pride, the unmasking that follows false authority. Power, when rooted in domination rather than consciousness, always carries within it the seed of its own destruction. The plantation owner's secret is not an isolated flaw, but the logical endpoint of a system built on suppression and exploitation. The same energy that enslaved others has enslaved him. The violence he inflicted externally returns to him internally. In this reversal, the slaves, once denied humanity, become symbols of authenticity. Their existence within the master's hidden world signifies the return of the repressed truth. The power dynamic between them becomes inverted. The master, who once defined them as property, now finds himself seeking from them something he cannot name, perhaps submission, perhaps acceptance, perhaps absolution. His desire reveals that beneath his cruelty lies a craving for connection, for freedom from the rigid persona that society has forced upon him. But because this longing is expressed in secrecy and shame, it becomes a form of degradation rather than redemption. What could have been a moment of transformation becomes a moment of exposure. The act uncovers the spiritual poverty of a man who has lived in denial of his humanity and that of others. The punishment that follows this discovery completes the inversion. The wife, once bound to silence and obedience, becomes the agent of judgment. The master, once the judge of all, becomes the judged. The town, once obedient to his authority, now stands as witness to his disgrace. The social order turns upon itself. The act of punishment transforms into a symbolic cleansing, the purging of false power through humiliation. The wife's command that the town witness his fall ensures that the reversal is complete. The ruler becomes the spectacle. The silenced become the seers, and the unseen truth becomes public revelation. The town's participation in his punishment marks the end of the illusion of his supremacy. They had once feared and revered him. Now they gaze upon him as an equal, stripped of the symbols of power that once separated him from them. This reversal exposes the fact that authority is not innate but constructed, dependent on the consent, fear, and ignorance of others. When that illusion breaks, power dissolves into dust. From a psychological perspective, this reversal is the necessary counterpart to repression. What is denied internally must eventually manifest externally in an opposite form. The master's secret affair with the slaves is the shadow side of his public authority. His fall is not a random event, but the inevitable expression of his inner imbalance. In the unconscious, opposites are always seeking integration. What is exalted must be humbled. What is hidden must be revealed. What is dominant must eventually bow to what it has suppressed. This law of psychic balance governs both individuals and societies. The plantation, with its rigid hierarchy and illusion of control, was destined to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The master's scandal merely accelerates what was already unfolding in the collective soul of the town. His personal fall becomes the symbolic fall of a world order, the disintegration of a system that sustains itself through denial. In the end, the reversal of power between the master and the enslaved exposes a truth that transcends scandal or morality. True authority cannot exist without self-knowledge. The plantation owner's downfall is not simply the punishment for sin, but the revelation of ignorance, the ignorance of his own divided nature. The slaves he ruled over were never merely bodies to control. They were mirrors of his inner life, fragments of the self he refused to acknowledge. When he sought to dominate them, he was in fact trying to dominate the chaos within himself. When he lay with them, he was unconsciously trying to reconcile with what he had denied. But because he did not do so in awareness, it became corruption instead of redemption. The exposure, the humiliation, and the punishment that follow are therefore not only external consequences, but the symbolic return of what he has long rejected. The truth that no man can be master over others until he has first faced the servant within himself. At the heart of this story lies the profound tension between desire, shame, and the possibility of transformation through suffering. The plantation owner's exposure, his disgrace before the entire community, is not only a moral collapse, but a psychological unmasking. His hidden desires, once buried beneath a lifetime of control and superiority, have erupted into visibility. This eruption represents not the triumph of lust, but the inevitable confrontation with the repressed self, that part of the psyche which cannot be silenced without consequence. The forbidden act that once gave him secret pleasure becomes the catalyst of his downfall, and yet within this downfall lies the potential for inner awakening. Desire, in this sense, is not simply sin, it is the fire that burns through illusion, the inner energy that, when suppressed, festers into corruption, but when faced consciously, can lead to truth. The master's life before exposure had been a performance, a rigid adherence to a role defined by dominance, pride, and the illusion of moral authority. His position as a plantation owner required him to embody an image of absolute control, both over others and over himself. Yet this control was a lie, a fragile mask concealing the primal needs and fears that lived beneath his consciousness. The more he denied them, the more they grew in secret. His encounters with the slaves, shameful and hidden, were not acts of love or power, but manifestations of the psychological conflict tearing him apart. Each act of indulgence deepened the split between who he pretended to be and who he really was. Desire became both his escape and his prison. It offered temporary relief from his repression, while simultaneously binding him deeper in guilt. This internal contradiction, the coexistence of pleasure and shame, defined his existence long before the world discovered his secret. When the wife uncovered the truth and turned private sin into public humiliation, the plantation owner was forced into a confrontation with himself that he had long avoided. Suffering entered his life not as punishment alone, but as revelation. What was once hidden in the shadows of his mind now stood naked before the gaze of others. The exposure stripped him of every illusion, his authority, his masculinity, his respectability. In the agony of disgrace, the false self, the persona that the world had revered, was destroyed. What remained was the raw, trembling reality of his being. This is the nature of true suffering. It dismantles the ego, reducing a man to the essential truth of his existence. Pain becomes the fire that burns away pretense, leaving behind either ashes or transformation. The link between shame and rebirth runs through the history of human consciousness. Every great transformation demands a descent into darkness, a symbolic death before renewal. The plantation owner's humiliation before the town mirrors this ancient pattern. He must die to his old self before any possibility of redemption can arise. The shame he feels, though unbearable, holds within it the potential for awakening, if only he can endure it without retreating into bitterness or denial. Shame is not merely the consequence of wrongdoing. It is the mirror through which one finally sees the self clearly. It exposes the gap between what one pretends to be and what one truly is. In this sense, his suffering is sacred, even if he does not yet understand it. Yet transformation is not guaranteed by suffering alone. It requires consciousness, the willingness to confront one's own inner contradictions and accept them as part of the human whole. The plantation owner's greatest challenge is not the punishment inflicted by his wife or the scorn of the townspeople, but the temptation to turn away from what his suffering reveals. If he clings to pride, denial, or self-pity, he will remain imprisoned by shame. But if he surrenders to the truth of his own brokenness, he may begin the long process of integration. The act that destroyed his public identity could, paradoxically, become the seed of his inner liberation. To see one's shadow clearly, to acknowledge the darkness within without fleeing from it, is the beginning of self-knowledge. Through the acceptance of guilt, not the avoidance of it, comes the possibility of redemption. The wife's decision to expose him publicly, though seemingly cruel, can also be understood as the externalization of his inner judgment. She becomes the voice of conscience that he could not summon within himself. Her act forces him to see what he has long refused to see. The eyes of the town, staring upon his disgrace, become the collective gaze of truth. Each spectator becomes a reflection of the moral reality he denied. There is no escape now, no mask to hide behind. In this crucible of public shame, he faces the naked self, the one stripped of every illusion of power. His suffering is both punishment and initiation. He is being forced to feel what he once inflicted upon others: vulnerability, exposure, and helplessness. Through this reversal, he experiences the humanity he once denied. This form of suffering carries a strange duality, destruction and possibility coexisting within the same moment. In his humiliation lies the opportunity to awaken compassion, not only for himself, but for those he once oppressed. The pain of exposure can open the heart to understanding. The walls that once separated him from others, class, race, power, and pride, have been torn down by the force of truth. If he learns from his suffering, he may begin to see the slaves not as extensions of his power, but as mirrors of his own soul. The suffering that humiliates him can also humanize him. The same experience that breaks him can make him whole. However, the transformation that suffering offers depends entirely on whether he can endure the discomfort of truth. Many are destroyed by shame because they seek to escape it rather than learn from it. To transform through suffering, one must resist the impulse to flee into denial or despair. He must sit with the weight of what he has done, with the unbearable awareness of who he has become, until a deeper understanding emerges. This inner endurance, this willingness to face oneself fully, is the only path through which guilt can become wisdom. The plantation owner's journey, then, is not about regaining his reputation or reclaiming power. It is about the slow rebirth of the soul through the purifying fire of truth. Desire led him to corruption, shame stripped him bare, and suffering offered him a chance for rebirth. This sequence mirrors the timeless cycle of fall and redemption, the death of the false self followed by the emergence of authenticity. If he accepts his suffering as necessary, not as punishment but as revelation, he may come to understand that freedom does not lie in mastery over others, but in mastery over oneself. Through the very pain that destroyed his pride, he can discover humility. Through the humiliation that stripped him of everything, he can finally become real. In this way, suffering becomes the hidden doorway to transformation, a dark passage that, once endured, leads not to ruin, but to awakening. The punishment that unfolded after the wife's discovery became something greater than a personal reckoning. It turned into a ritual of collective transformation, a symbolic resurrection of moral consciousness in a world that had lost its sense of truth. The plantation, once a monument to hierarchy and cruelty, became the stage upon which the illusion of superiority collapsed. The wife's command that the entire town witness the master's humiliation was not only a cry for vengeance but a demand for awakening, a moment in which the hidden sickness of the community was forced into the open. This act, though born of pain, functioned as a form of purification, a collective exorcism that tore apart the silence sustaining corruption. The fall of one man was, in truth, the fall of an entire system built on lies. In the blinding exposure of his sin, the town could no longer deny the decay within its own soul. What began as scandal became revelation, and what began as vengeance became the possibility of rebirth. The townspeople, standing as witnesses, represented the collective moral unconscious of their society. Each of them had lived within the comfort of false virtue, hiding behind rules, religion, and status, pretending not to see the suffering that made their comfort possible. The master's sin was not unique. It was merely the visible form of what had always existed beneath the surface. The wife's command that all should watch forced them into confrontation with their own reflection. The shame they saw in him was their own shame externalized. The fear they felt was the recognition that they too lived within a structure of oppression sustained by silence. The ritual of exposure became therefore a moral reckoning that extended beyond one man's punishment. In that moment, the entire town faced the truth of its participation in a system where power justified cruelty, where purity was pretended but never practiced. The punishment symbolized not only judgment, but cleansing. The wife, though driven by fury, became the instrument through which moral order began to reassert itself. Her act stripped away the hypocrisy of law and custom, cutting directly to the raw truth that morality cannot exist without honesty. The plantation, which had stood as a shrine to control, now became the altar of truth's return. The humiliation of the master, the man who had once ruled through domination, became the seed of a new consciousness, one that recognized the interconnectedness of guilt, desire, and power. His exposure forced the community to see that no wall of status could protect one from the consequences of deceit. In seeing him fall, they were confronted with the fragility of their own righteousness. Through his disgrace, the illusion of moral superiority disintegrated. In this public act, the enslaved, once invisible, once deemed voiceless, became central to the story. The man's transgression with them had already blurred the boundary between master and servant, but his punishment erased it entirely. As they stood among the witnesses, they were no longer objects of pity or control, but living testaments to truth. Their presence during his exposure transformed the scene into a symbol of reversal and renewal. The people who had been forced into silence now occupied the position of witnesses to justice. The hierarchy that had divided human worth was, for a brief moment, leveled. The community, which had built its identity on the oppression of others, could no longer look upon the enslaved without remembering what they had seen: the fall of the master, the exposure of lies, the collapse of pretense. In this sense, the punishment not only condemned the guilty but liberated the silenced. It redefined who held moral power. The wife's vengeance thus became a paradoxical act of redemption. She sought to destroy the man who had betrayed her, yet in doing so, she restored to the world a sense of balance. Her fury became the hand of moral law, her grief the voice of conscience that could no longer be suppressed. In her, the feminine principle, long subdued and dismissed, rose as the force of truth that male authority had long denied. The punishment she orchestrated was brutal, but its brutality reflected the severity of the lies it exposed. The community needed to see what it had become. It needed to be shaken out of its moral sleep. In the same way that the master's hidden desires revealed his divided nature, the wife's public act revealed the divided soul of the town. Through destruction, she initiated the process of healing. Through exposure, she began the work of renewal. This symbolic resurrection, however, did not emerge without suffering. The town's collective conscience could not awaken without pain. The image of the master's fall haunted them long after the punishment ended. In their hearts, they carried the recognition that every illusion they had believed in about purity, power, race, and gender had been shattered. The memory of his disgrace became a kind of moral scar, a reminder that no hierarchy, no law, no religion could shield one from the truth of the human condition. The wife's act had resurrected conscience, but it had also burdened them with awareness. The simple world of moral certainty was gone. In its place remained the difficult knowledge that virtue requires self-knowledge, that power must always confront its own shadow, and that truth, once revealed, cannot be forgotten. In the psychological sense, the entire episode represents the death and rebirth of the collective psyche. The master's exposure is the symbolic death, the destruction of the false ego that governed both him and the society around him. The wife's act of vengeance is the descent into the underworld, the necessary confrontation with shadow and pain. The aftermath, the silent reflection that follows, is the rebirth, the emergence of new awareness. Through the suffering of one man and the outrage of one woman, the town undergoes transformation. Its innocence dies, but wisdom takes its place. The plantation, which had once been the heart of moral decay, becomes the point from which a new moral order begins to grow. What makes this moment powerful is that it does not end in triumph, but in recognition. The wife's act did not erase pain, it revealed it. The punishment did not restore purity, it unveiled the cost of deception. Yet, within that exposure lies the possibility of a new kind of freedom, the freedom born from truth. The town, though scarred, begins to see beyond the superficial divisions of class and color, beyond the rigid laws of domination. The enslaved, the wife, the master, and the townspeople all become part of the same story, the eternal cycle of fall, suffering, and renewal. Through humiliation, they learn humility. Through exposure, they learn honesty. Through suffering, they begin to understand compassion. The entire event becomes a moral resurrection, not the restoration of what was lost, but the awakening to what had always been buried. The truth that no soul can remain enslaved once it has looked upon the face of truth. In the end, this story is not about vengeance or disgrace, but revelation. The plantation owner's fall, the wife's fury, the town's gaze, all became mirrors reflecting the secret wounds of human nature. Beneath the collapse of power and pride lay a deeper transformation. the destruction of falsehood and the slow birth of conscience. When the mask of authority shattered, so too did the illusion that one could own another's body or soul. His humiliation became the spark that illuminated the shadows of an entire community. It showed that suffering, though cruel, can awaken truth, that exposure, though painful, can cleanse corruption, and that redemption, though born in ashes, can still rise. The wife did not just punish a man, she resurrected a truth buried in silence. And in that moment, every eye that watched saw not only his shame, but their own reflection, the eternal reminder that no one escapes the mirror of truth when it finally demands to be seen.